So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Espinoza from D5 Render, and he'll talk more about the technology of rendering and AI and computer vision and all that fun stuff. Jeff.
All right, well, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to join today's talk. The 3 tiers of co-intelligence and visualization, how AI is redefining creative control and guiding tool adoption for architects and designers. And so if your experiences are anything like mine, then every time you open up your phone, you open up LinkedIn, social media, you're constantly being bombarded by new AI tools out there. And no matter what your thoughts are on AI, whether you love it, hate it, you think it's a passing fad, the fact of the matter is that it's here, it's already embedded in our tools, and so it's up to us as thought leaders, as technologists, to sift through this noise in order to bring clarity into our studios. And so before going on any further, let's start with some quick introductions. My name is Jeffrey Espinoza. I am the Director of Customer Success and Services at D5 Render. And my job isn't really to sell clients on trends, it's really to understand how trends meet reality. You know, what happens when you have a Monday deadline, or what happens when it's Monday night and you have a deadline that you have to get ready for on Tuesday morning. And so in my role, one of my many privileges is that I get to work with a lot of the leading AEC firms in the world. And I get to hear about their losses, their successes, and what becomes abundantly clear is that when these firms succeed, it's because they're developing frameworks. And so that's really what today's talk is all going to be about, is how can we start to develop frameworks for categorizing and validating all these different AI tools that are coming out, and why it matters for AEC firms, and the bottom line, how do we start to improve productivity and increase ROI? And from there, we can take a look at some tangible next steps for how we can start to audit and validate our current AI tech stack. And of course, be sure to stick around towards the end where we'll have a Q&A. So if we take a look at today's landscape, AI is already changing how we work. We're already seeing a paradigm shift from our specialists, you know, whether it be your ArcViz team or your Viz studio. You know, beforehand, we used to have these specialized skills. You needed someone who understood composition, materiality, lighting, and they needed to have dedicated roles. You know, you couldn't just have your project manager spending countless hours, whether it be 6, 13 hours, developing just one still image. This is why you need your dedicated roles, and these dedicated roles or specialists also needed to familiarize themselves with all these advanced visualization tools, whether it be going from Enscape to V-Ray to Unreal Engine. Again, they needed to master a whole suite of different tool sets. And so that's where co-intelligence comes into play. It helps bridge the gap between human intent and technical know-how. Now we can have the machines talking to the other machines in order to deliver our vision. And so now that you're getting bombarded with all these different AI tools and you're having to shift your way through all the noise, you know, you're looking at which tools matter. So you're trying to decide, do I want to invest in this tool? Do I want to bring it into my current tech stack? And while you're thinking about this, now you're also thinking about, okay, so where within the pipeline does it fit? Is it an early conceptual design tool, or is it more towards the end for an end-of-market tool? And by the time you've answered this, you realize that it's 6 months have gone by, nobody's using this tool, it's become shelfware. And so how do we avoid these steps? How do we make sure that the tools that we are implementing are actually being utilized and are being useful to our everyday designers? That's where this 3 tiers framework comes into play. And so as you can see, we start off with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and each one sort of builds on top of each other. And so if we take a look at tier 1, we can take a look at our tasks level co-intelligence. And so these are our modular or these very specific AI tasks. You know, this is where you're maybe asking AI to help you make a material seamless. This is where you're maybe asking it to upscale an image. And so if you'll humor me, the analogy I like to bring up here is maybe this is my X-Acto knife. It's really good at cutting but it's not going to get me to the end result. I'm not going to be able to just make a scale model with that X-Acto knife. So if we look at tier 2, this is where we get our modular level co-intelligence. This is where we start to combine a bunch of smaller AI task levels in order to create a whole process. And so you can think of this as your toolbox. Now you have your knife, you have your glue, your T-square, and now you're able to create a scale model. And then lastly, we end at tier 3. This is really where co-intelligence comes into play. This is where you're providing AI with intent, design direction. And so what's after our toolbox? That's going to be the 3D file. You know, you're just providing it a 3D model, some design intent, and the 3D machine is the one that's actually producing the scale model for you. And so if we take a look at this within the context of D5 Render, you'll see that we do have a bunch of tier 1 AI tools. And so we're able to upscale images, we're able to make them seamless, we're able to create all these different texture channels. And so this still does require some, I guess, expertise, because as a visualization specialist, you know that this material needs to have all these different channels in order to create a PBR texture. So the barrier to entry is still, you know, not as quite low as we'd like it to be. And so what that means is that it's not really disrupting your workflow because your specialists are still taking advantage of this. And it still requires visualization expertise to some extent, but it is helping reduce workflows and bottlenecks. And so then you have your modular level co-intelligence. And so again, looking at it from the context of D5 Render, what we have is our PBR material generation, which I can get into. We also have our smart post-processing features, and this will help you speed up time that you would otherwise spend inside of Photoshop, you know, in order to develop a stylized look to your renderings. And then you also have AI Atmosphere Match, which helps to set up your rendering settings rather than you having to manually input each precise value. And so going back into that PBR material generation, within D5, all you need to do is take a picture of a material, and it's able to automatically know that it needs to make it seamless, it needs to generate these PBR textures, and it also needs to make sure that it's in HDR texture. And so now we started to modularize all these different independent AI tools. And then lastly, we have workflow level co-intelligence. Now I'm communicating with my AI. I'm letting it know, hey, I want you to generate this specific look and feel to my image, and it's able to take that into tangible steps and apply those to your workflow. So here's just an example of what that looks like. In this GIF here, we're giving it some direction, some intentionality, and from there, it's able to generate this look. It's able to take whatever you fed it and turn that into actionable steps for the software to understand. Here, this is our AI landscape feature. So within this feature, again, we're giving it some context, some intent. We're saying, build, let's say, I don't know, a landscape area in Phoenix, Arizona. It's gonna look at our asset library, pull some assets specific to that region, specific to that text prompt, and scatter these assets in my scene. And so how does this actually work under the hood? You know, it's not some magic bullet. It actually all starts with you, the designer. You're the one taking the director's chair. You're feeding your design intent into your AI agent, and this AI agent doesn't inherently know what you mean. You know, the designer's sitting in here and it's saying, I want you to generate this fall-looking rendering. Again, it doesn't inherently know what that means. And so this acts as the orchestrator. It feeds this to our LLM, and so this might be your ChatGPTs, your Claudes, your Geminis, and now this is the brains of the operation. It's turning your human language and it's translating that into computer talk. You know, it's saying, okay, you want a fall autumn rendering, that probably means you want some longer shadows, you probably want this very specific color correction value, and you probably want some trees with some fallen leaves. So let's feed that back to our orchestrator. Now that we have our actual directions, let's feed it back to our technical skills and ultimately the foundation. Since it's able to connect to all these different APIs, it understands this in a more, computer language. And so this is going to feed back into the AI agent and then show you the end result. But, it's a feedback loop. It doesn't just end there. Once it generates that image for you, you're able to say, you know what, you actually made this a bit too foggy. So you feed that input back into the AI agent and the process starts all over again. So it's ultimately you who has the final say. You're just acting as the creative director, feeding this AI agent some design input. And so, we do need to address the elephant in the room, and that's data residency and ownership. Once you start to introduce all these different AI tools, you are inherently developing a chain of custody, And so it's up to us as the gatekeepers to kind of do our due diligence with all these different AI tools that we start to adopt. And so, first of all, you do have your large language model providers, which a lot of them are free. There's no cost to signing up and to using them. And so while they might not have a dollar value associated to them, you probably are paying with it through your data, and it might show up in somebody else's ChatGPT. But that's why we need to make sure that we're going through the terms and services and making sure that we have enterprise level agreements. Let's make sure that our IP stays ours and isn't used to further train their model. And you can have the strictest of agreements with them, but it doesn't really matter if our AI agent provider is leaking this information and it's leaking some of these instructions that it was able to generate. And so we do need to apply that same level of scrutiny to our AI agents as well, making sure that our IP stays ours. And again, this all falls back on the design firms. We are the gatekeepers, and so we need to make sure that we acknowledge these risks and we figure out what the best, workflow is. Are we sourcing this through the cloud, or are we setting up our own local infrastructure to run all these AIs? And then lastly, as we move on to all these added tools, we need to start to consider global compliance and making sure that the AI tools that we're inheriting or utilizing are compliant as well. And so why even introduce all this risk? As the gatekeepers, after we've done our due diligence and we started to implement these workflows, you can see that as we move on from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, it does take on this sort of like human role. When you start with tier 1, that's kind of your assistant. It's a very isolated task. It's the effects aren't immediately felt because again, it is a very specialized tool. And then we move on to the collaborator. This is, again, your VIS team. Now they're able to save countless hours because they're able to group all these different modules together. And then lastly, you have your creative partner. This is where you get to see the most ROI because this is where it's actually taking these workflows, synthesizing them, and then it's pushing these out to actual instructions. And just to make that a bit clearer, maybe we can take a look at this graph as an example. We can take a look at the first line here at the top left. And so this might be everyone in tier 1. This is everyone that's in maybe Rhino and Enscape. They're able to create these visuals. And then as you move on to tier 3 and to tier 2 and to tier 3, this is where, again, your user pool grows or gets reduced because now your user pool is moving from Enscape to more specialized to, from Rhino to like Grasshopper, maybe they're moving from Enscape to V-Ray. And so in order to create these tier 3 results, your user pool does reduce, and so this does introduce some bottlenecks. But with the advent of co-intelligence, now we're introducing these tier 1 modules, which again, very specialized, very isolated. But as we start to ramp up to tier 2, tier 3, everybody can start to create better and better results because we all have access to the same tools and we're just acting as co-directors, or we're just acting as our directors, providing in instructions and then getting this feedback loop. And so as co-intelligence deepens, the work gets better because our overall baseline increases. We are able to work faster because we're reducing manual processes. And it's making people more productive because now they have more time to do the stuff that they actually want to do. And so I think we're past the question of, should we use AI? Maybe that was a question that we were asking ourselves 2 years ago. But as mentioned, the fact of the matter is that all these AI tools are already deeply embedded into the current tools that we're using today. And so the question is really, at what level of intelligence should we operate? What kind of processes, workflows should we start to adapt in order to make these AIs as productive as possible? And so here's the practical benefits for AEC firms. Once we start to categorize our AIs into different tiers, we can avoid tool sprawl. You know, if I'm looking at a tier 1 and I realize that I already have a tier 2 in my tool set, maybe I don't need to invest in this tool because I already have one that does the same thing already. Vendor tool comparison. If I'm talking to a sales rep and they're telling me that this is an end-to-end tool, but I can quickly acknowledge that it's just a tier 2, maybe I choose to look elsewhere to see if I can actually find a tier 3 tool set. Building strategic adoption roadmaps. So the thing about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 is it all relates back to, I guess, internal culture. If you just out of the blue tell your studio that you're going to go into tier 3, there might be some pushback. And so we do need to acknowledge that we might need to start off with tier 1, tier 2, in order to fully implement and start to use tier 3s within our offices. Risks and ROI assessments. Again, this is something that we all need to do some further research on, make sure that all our AI tools are compliant and that our IP stays our own IP. And then lastly, aligning training with intelligence tiers. So if you're just now starting to adopt tier 1 tools, maybe right now isn't the right time to start to turn all your different designers into master prompt builders. Maybe we just need to focus on these specialized tasks rather than jumping ahead and training them on tier 3. And so as for some tangible next steps that you can hopefully take to your Monday morning meetings, firstly, we need to audit our current tools. We need to figure out if the current tools we have right now are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then build a tiered roadmaps. So how can we start to Dixie chain these tier 1s together in order to hopefully achieve a tier 2 into a tier 3? And then once we figure that out, we can start to train our users and experimenting with these workflows. And then lastly, evaluating vendors and measuring impact. So once we've done all this, we can then start to figure out what the actual tangible effects have been from this. Have we been able to increase productivity? Have we been able to reduce costs on certain workflows? And so with that, I did just want to end it on this one slide because, you know, with all this talk of AI, there certainly is a lot of anxiety as to, is it gonna take some of our jobs away, or is it gonna, you know, what happens once AI reaches a certain level? And the truth of the matter is that we're always going to need architects and designers to provide that creative vision. This AI can't really contextualize site context, social context, political context. It's all up to us as designers, as architects, to sort of make those decisions. And so, again, we're really just acting as the directors, giving AI some input and letting the machines do the machines work and helping us reduce these manual, repetitive tasks. And so with that, I would like to open up the floor for any questions that anyone might have. But before you do so, feel free to scan these QR codes where if you want to schedule a consultation with us, where we can talk to you a little bit more about the D5 Render product and its current AI stack, as well as checking the reports, the 2025 impact of AI in architecture and design. So again, thank you everyone for your time. And if there are any questions, please feel free to ask.
Any questions?
I never.
Tricky for small firms to be able to keep up with, you know, some of these steps of evaluating these tools.
No, I guess what I was really saying is that currently, if you are using any AI tools in your own tier stack, right, in your own tech stack right now, it's really a matter of trying to figure out within which tier they fall. You know, where with the current AI tools that we have right now, is it a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? And if it really is just a tier 1, is there any feasible way to get to the next step in order to create these workflows?
Any other questions? you see the job of the current visualization staff evolving to that director, creative director? Does this mean we're gonna have less specialized visualizing people, or is it gonna be a same tool, more specialized? What do you see?
I think I see it more as curators setting standards. There always will be, I guess, a firm signature, and so it's really up to the specialists right now to sort of develop these standards and deploy them to the larger firm, maybe setting up trainings for the user base.
Question right over here.
You flip the button up, right by your thumb. There we go.
Still not. It's okay. I'll just speak loudly, okay?
Yes, thank you.
Jeffrey, thank you. I appreciate the framework. I think it's much needed with all the stuff that's going on with AI. Just having a system or framework for us to think about how we should be looking at it, I think is really useful and beneficial. Because my question is, tier 3, when you're describing intent and using large language models and generative AI to create concepts and ideas, I know one of the issues that we've experienced is it almost treats the generation as within, global parameters. What I mean by that is, in your example, you said it's too fuzzy. That's a general statement about what you want to occur.
Right.
I think one of the issues we're experiencing is when you want to change specific parameters or specific items, then it's you lose a little bit of that control over how you can generate and how you can modify things with this visualization. So I just wondered if you have any thoughts about the way forward in that sense and how we can have more control over how generative AI is creating concepts for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, since Flow Intelligence is actually going in there and changing physical parameters within the software, so take D5 as a reference point, what it's doing is it is changing a slider within D5 that alters the fog. And so again, since you know that it's actually a parameter that lives within the model, can go back in there and sort of fine tune that, bring that parameter back. And so maybe the AI is just painting with a wide brush, and then once it's done and shown you the result, you can either reiterate by giving it another text prompt, or you can actually go in there and start to change these parameters yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, you're up. You have one question back here. Okay. Kimmel, please.
A question on the IP. There's a lot of discussions about IP in other industries too. How do you see the way you described it with common intelligence specifically for architecture? Where's the line drawn? In other words, have you explored what does that really mean to protect architectural IP? What is that? What is the architecture?
Right, well, I guess I can only speak for D5 Render itself. And so within D5 Render in our terms of use, we do say that all that data is proprietary to you as the studios, as the firm, as the designers. And so we're not really using that data to further train our models. We're really just using cloud storage or cloud computing to actually process your images. And so again, I think it's up to us as the gatekeepers to really look through those terms of services to see what these companies say.
A question about sort of the next generation of architects coming up. So we architects have spent a lot of time working on bathroom plans and staircases, right? And it, sorry.
There you go.
Hi. Is that better?
Go ahead.
Great. And those items are tedious, and I think that is where AI is sort of trying to specialize and jump in and help automate those things. But you do learn a lot about buildings, and I'm wondering how we can use AI to bridge that gap as opposed to just avoiding that transmission of knowledge. You kind of,
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I see what you're saying. You do learn a lot from your failures and from just going through the usual workflows. And I think where AI lies is just by, I guess, reducing or lowering the barrier to entry. And so, you, yeah, that one's a question I would probably have to put some more thought into.
I don't have a good answer.
Yeah.
I think we have one back here.
Hi. So I think at our firm, we're sort of questioning this idea of like ownership. I know you touched upon. There's like a slide about ownership, and if I'm sort of purchasing a license from ChatGPT or a license from B5, should I be trusting that you guys have vetted said ownership, and that way, like, if I show rendering to a client, I'm not like subjugated to any of the copyright violations, or as a designer using these AI tools, do I need to have like extra caution?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think these are the questions that you need to start asking, like the AI tools that you're, thinking about introducing into your company. Making sure that they're going through the same scrutiny. So when you do, I guess, make a subscription with a LLM, it's just an agreement to you and them. But then once you do start to look at these large language models that sort of link to multiple different AI tool stacks, then I think that's when some level of scrutiny is, needed. So you should be asking your co-intelligence agency questions, definitely.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we have a question over here.
Hi, my question is more regarding the aspect of how AI is used. So for example, I know that, for example, D5 is specifically or mostly used for renderings. But I wanted to kind of get your opinion or your thoughts on any rendering or on AI that's used for either, like, for example, reading code and getting your, like, initial like a summary or basically like a way to provide you information about a site or something in order to develop it for your project. Or another type, or all the types of AI where it's specifically for, I don't know, answering emails or something that, like, I know that you mentioned the idea of stacks, and that's where I'm assuming is where you have different types of AI. I wanted to get your thoughts on possibly kind of getting your ideas on some of the AI that you personally use or some that you not engage.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't think of anything out of the top of my head. Again, most of my experience has been with D5 render, visualization, and its current AI stack. So that's probably something I would need to follow up with you on.
The question over here.
Do you guys find that most people are using D5 render for presentation level kind of, end status renderings, or do you find that people are using it, or, in your use cases as a sidecar to the design process? Is the intent of D5 render and the AI assistance to be, here's the final image of the thing, or like are people using it as a process-based tool as well?
Yeah, so with D5 render, I think we took the same recommended workflow. We did start off with just tier ones where you'd still need it would still be introduced maybe midway or towards the end of the visualization process when you were trying to create these like beautiful renderings. And so we did just start off with tier one AIs where you would use this for improving your material quality or maybe tackling some light rendering settings. And then we moved on to tier two, which is where we did try to implement this in maybe more early on design stages, or conceptual stages, by introducing style transfers. And so now you were able to generate these like stylized watercolor effects, marker effects, pencil effects. And so now we've actually reached the level of co-intelligence. So we did go ahead and release D5 Lite. And this is more of like an early conceptual design tool, which it is able to take direction and generate these image outputs. And we also did go ahead and release the AI agent, which is where you can start to give it a text prompt and it'll give you some recommendations based on the information you fed it. And I guess to directly answer your question, we did start off as just like a halfway through the process rendering tool by, starting off with tier ones. But now that we've gone to tier three, I think it really is from early conceptual design all the way through final renderings.
I have a question about IP. So you talked about how it would be secured IP when you're incorporating that workflow. And know that we already have a couple of questions in terms of the IP. But if we think of how the LLM started first, with the tech company train their data by inputting all the images that is available online. And that has shaped how the AI has this ability of creativity. So how would you think that we can set the limit of more beneficial to a larger creativity group of sharing the knowledge and creativity to make it better work, and the boundaries of securing our own creativity in the firm?
Yeah, I think that's when these enterprise level agreements are needed between you and the LLM to make sure that, whatever data is being trained on isn't yours, and whatever information or parameters you're providing it aren't being used to further, enhance the AI. It's just using whatever data it already has.
I have a question here. So building on the back of some of these questions about LLMs, in your work doing your tech stack, it sounds like you're connecting to the API for the large language models that you're using often. What about training your own model, hosting it locally, but keeps it all in-house, and then connecting that to the D5? Is that something that actually happens or can happen in the tech stack? And then for D5 itself, you mentioned it's going to the cloud. Is that your own locally trained model, or are you also API accessing some of these bigger models to do the heavy lifting for D5?
So can you repeat the part one of that question?
Is it possible to host your own local
yeah.
LLM and train it yourself?
So that's something that we've looked at internally, but I believe it was quite expensive. So that's not something that it's currently offered, but it is something that we're still considering and might show up in the roadmap in the near future. And then in terms of what's actually happening under the hood, we are using Stable Diffusion to do some of the heavy computing. We've also started to transition into Nano Banana, so that's what we're also utilizing them for some of our image generation. And so those are specifically the AIs that we're using under the hood.
Any other questions? We have one more.
So that's ready to go. That's good.
To go off the API question, you showed that networking, the workflow. As that data is flowing there, do you have APIs? So for example, if we're loading data or prompts or other information into D5, can we then query those and use it for our agents to do other things? I know you might not have it right now, but is that in the roadmap where you have conversations with other AI agents, whether they're offline or online, through APIs, or through applications, just API connections so humans can reach back?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I think right now we are exclusively using Stable Diffusion and Nano Banana, but those questions have been asked, and so that is something that our product team is looking into. How do we take advantage of whatever current tech stack you have now, and how do we implement that into D5 render? So that is something that our product team is considering right now.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation.
Thank you.
Towards the end, you had a slide about adoption being strategic. And of course, one of the points of friction, there you go, so ROI. And it's a real tough one a lot of times for firms. I'm just curious how involved you are either with your existing or potential customers, helping to define it, what it looks like in a language that resonates for them, how to capture it in that process, because we find that's often the point of friction for large and small firms alike in the industry.
Yeah, we did have a couple of case studies with Big and KPF, and at the scale that KPF was talking about, I think they said they were able to reduce their outsourcing costs by 80%, if I'm not mistaken. And so we do have some tangible ROIs, and we could share some of those documents with you as well.
Any more questions?
I had a comment. It's kind of like a comment question that I'd like for you to just expound on. So one of the slides you mentioned, tool sprawl. And I think that's a really great way to explain the pain that we have as technologists to manage teams across a large organization. But the embracement of leadership allowing their downline staff to use tools is really helpful. But I was curious if you had any insight on like the friction points large or small firms have with tool sprawl, if you could talk about that. Because one of the questions that was asked earlier was literally about adopting a new tool. And I think what large organizations sort of take for granted is that we have the budget, the time, and the staff to experiment with tools. But you know, a 20-person or whatever, mid-sized firm needs to use the right tool at the right time, right? And so I'm just curious if you could just give us a little bit more like intelligence or exposure.
Yeah, and I think it is a lot of just training and awareness, you know, making sure that your studios, your designers, they know what tools are at hand. Oftentimes they'll put the onus on themselves to, okay, I found this nice little AI tool out there, it does this one specific task, let me just create a free subscription. But I think it really is up to us to just let them know what tools are at hand. Okay, so now we have D5 Render, which does have Tier 3 intelligence, and so that means that it does have all these subtasks below it, these sub-AIs. And so I think it really is a matter of just letting them know that maybe this one specific AI tool that they want might be already a part of their current tech stack.
Okay, Melvin, I think.
Yeah,
I think we're good.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.